So now we're going to look at the issue of levels of measurement. We talked about how to conceptualize the measurement and to operationalize it through procedures that we come up with. And the result, though, is some specific numerical data that represents sort of the culmination of the measurement process. Now, the numbers are not all the same. There are different levels of quantification. And so our measures could end up being either quantitative, meaning they refer to quantities of something, or categorical, meaning that the measurement or the numbers we produce stand for categories of something. So quantitative measures might be something like dollars of income or years of age, and a categorical measure might be something like whether we classify the household as being poor or not poor. Now, within the quantitative measurements, people sometimes distinguish between an interval measure and a ratio measure. That turns out to be not as important of a distinction for most purposes. I should mention that one of the reasons that these levels of measurement are important more broadly is because they influence the level of or the kind of statistical tools that you would use to look at the data. And that particular distinction between interval and ratio is not all that important for many statistical techniques. But a ratio measure is one that has a true 0 point, and an interval measure is quantitative but does not have an actual zero, a meaningful 0 point. So again, don't worry about that distinction as much as the next thing, which is the categorical measures can be distinguished between those that are nominal, where the numbers just stand for categories with no order to them, inherent order, or ordinal measures, which do have an order to them. And ordinal measures might be things like if we classify customers as being very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, or not at all satisfied. Those have an order to them. So let's take a look at these examples and just see if you can figure out the level of measurement. So identify the level of measurement for each of the following variables. So size of household. Let's say this comes from a household survey or a survey of adults. So how large is your household? How many people live there, including yourself? What's your race? White, black, Hispanic, other. And then how would you rate your health? Excellent, good, fair, or poor. So now let's look at the first one, size of household. So what is that, quantitative or categorical? Well, that turns out to be quantitative, right? Because the number of people is a quantity of something. You could have a household with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe people. It refers to the number of people, right? So it's a quantitative variable. It turns out to be a ratio because there's a true 0 point. I don't know if it makes sense that a household would have 0 people, but it's a count variable, and so it's quantitative. Now the next variable, race, is what? The numbers don't stand for quantities of anything, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rather, they represent categories, right? It says so, right? With categories, 1 equals white, 2 equals black, 3 equals Hispanic, and so on. So this is a categorical variable. But the categories have no inherent order to them. We could have made Hispanic 1, black 2, white 3, and so on. It's a nominal variable. The categories have no inherent order to them, even though in a population there might be more whites than blacks and more blacks than Hispanics, for example. That's not the notion of an order to the category. What makes an order to the categories is if the categories themselves can only be arranged in one way. So let's look at the next one, which turns out to be an example of that, an example of an ordinal variable. So we looked at this in a previous video, the notion of a self-reported measure of health. How good is your health these days? Excellent, good, fair, poor. Now those categories can only be arranged in a particular order. So excellent is better than good, good is better than only fair, and only fair is better than poor. Now of course we could recode them, right? Or reorder them so that it goes poor, fair, good, excellent, but that only, in other words, we could switch the order around, but that only illustrates that they do go in a particular order, from more health to less health, or from less health to more health. So either way, it's a ordinal variable, and we couldn't rearrange it in any other way. So now again, these distinctions are important because we would analyze an ordinal variable differently than we would a categorical variable, or we would graph an ordinal variable differently than we would graph a nominal variable, and we would be able to do certain things with a quantitative variable that we could not do with a nominal variable, for example. Okay. Now, the thing that makes levels of measurement a little complicated sometimes is that the same concept can be measured at different levels. So there's nothing inherent, let's say, about income that makes it a quantitative variable. I mean, I gave that in the beginning as an example. So what is your household income last year from all sources? We could give a number, right? And then that would be quantitative. We just asked it in that way with an open-ended, let's say $40,000 or $35,000 or $65,000, whatever number we put there. That would be quantitative, right? But in many surveys, that question of income is asked in a categorical way, because people don't like to, or give their exact income, and it may be, or they maybe can't give it very accurately, and it's better just to give them categories. So if we ask the question, what was your income last year from all sources, and we put it into categories like this, less than 25,000, between 25,000 and 50, and more than 50,000, then that would make, if that's our measurement procedure, if that's the way we operationalize income, then income in our survey or in our data would be an ordinal variable. That's an ordinal variable with three categories of income. So in other words, the level of measurement is not inherent in the thing, the object, or the reality being measured. What's makes for the level of measurement is the way in which we decide to code or categorize the data when we collect it. It's related very much to how the measurement is operationalized. So in the first example, we operationalize income by asking an open-ended question, and we record an actual number. That's a way to, in that operationalization of income, it's quantitative. If we operationalize income by asking a question like this, sorry, let me go back, where we give people income categories to put themselves into, then we've made income a categorical variable. Okay. Now, another complication is that the level of measurement changes depending on the unit of analysis. So a good example of this is poverty, which we've been talking about, and we use in the chapter as our prime example. But poverty at the individual level is a categorical variable, and in particular a nominal variable. So people are either poor or they're not poor. So they might be coded 1 for poor and 0 for not poor. But then if we change the unit of analysis, that's at the level of the household. If we look at counties or cities or populations of countries even, the unit of analysis changes, and then we're looking at the percent of the population, let's say, living in poverty. And that's suddenly now a quantitative variable. So if we aggregate a categorical variable like poverty from the individual level to a country level, let's say, then the data is then quantitative. So again, it's there's nothing inherent in some ways in the phenomena being measured. It all depends on the kind of data that you're looking at and whether the variables have been, in this case, aggregated or not.